Martínez de Rituerto with El País. Commander, how many people were on these boats when the boats were attacked, if you have any idea? Because apparently the situation was very peaceful. They were just moved at the dock. And why didn't you do these attacks when they were bombing the land positions of the rebels on the cities? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the first question first. Sorry, the second part first. The reason they were attacked at this moment in time is it had become very clear to NATO and the coalition that Gaddafi's tactics had changed. He had started to use his maritime forces. He was using maritime forces to lay mines in the entrance to Misrata. He was laying booby tracks, which could quite easily have been approached by a civilian vessel or a military vessel. And if any vessel had been near that booby-trapped rib with a ton of explosives, not only would it have hurt every person on board, whether it was a civilian ship or a military ship, it most likely would have sunk it. The intent was clearly there to start changing their tactics. Should we have waited until somebody else had been killed, or should we have taken action? I suggest we took action to enable us to stop and reduce that risk to the civilian population. In regard to the first part of that question, the numbers involved, we have meticulously tried to inform the Libyan people and the armed forces to move away from all forms of military equipment, installation, and specifically maritime and land equipment that could be used to enact these sort of catastrophes onto the civilian people. So I can't answer the question with numbers, but we have done everything we can to make sure that they were aware that the risks were extremely high. Thank you.
Next question.
I want to come back to both of these points, actually.
Can you please identify yourself?
Sorry, Bruno Waterfield, the Daily Telegraph. As far as you're aware, did those vessels have crews on board, or does the fact that they were docked mean perhaps they didn't have crews on board? And again, I'd just like to come back. I mean, it does seem odd that you should attack vessels in dock when they don't seem to clearly be presenting a threat in the fact that they're not at sea. One would have thought that perhaps if they were moving towards an area, then perhaps that would be the moment to hit them. So could you again develop more about what intelligence maybe you had or whatever that gave you this cause to attack them?
Bruno, thank you very much for that question. Well structured. Got my brain trying to calculate all of that. I think the first thing I need to cover is why did we attack them where they were? There was clear intent from the situation NATO had found themselves with the significant change in tactics by Gaddafi's and pro-Gaddafi maritime forces. So the risk was there. There was clear intent. They were legal targets. They were within the targets allowed within the mission and the remit presented by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. I think really beyond that, I have nothing more to add.
Slovo follow-up.
Yeah, Slovo Lekic from the Associated Press. Just a follow-up to the previous question. Were these ships that we saw hit, the Kony and the Combatant, do you know for a fact that they were actually used in attacks on Misrata or the laying of mines? Because the previous information was that the pro-Gaddafi forces were using speedboats, small speedboats, to lay the mines. So were these ships that were hit yesterday actually utilized for that purpose?
Okay. I'm not going to go down into the intelligence or the tactics that the commander used to make those decisions. They were identified as clearly legitimate and legal targets. They were within the NATO rules of engagement, and therefore they were attacked on those bases.
Aren't there other ways of neutralizing ships when they are at dock? For example, mining, putting an allied ship in front of the harbor so that you avoid any ship to go out. Why the choice of bombing them from using air power?
Okay. In answering that question, I would say that our aim was not to destroy these ships, but to remove their ability to turn their military weapons onto the civilian population. humanitarian assistance, or NATO vessels. And in doing that,
I don't think you can do much with that ship after what we saw.
I doubt if you can do much with those ships. They certainly won't be turning their vast array of military capability onto the civilian populations where they were docked.
And if they were hit, it's because they were considered by the commander that they represent a threat. They represented a threat to civilians. Tadef?
Mike, here's Kai, Niklas from German Television, ZDF. Please allow two questions. The first question would be there are news reports that Gaddafi is offering fire cease. Do you consider these offers as being serious, and will NATO react on that? And the second part, you said you had a turning point 2 weeks ago. How would you describe the strength of the Gaddafi forces at the moment in general? Can you give us an idea?
Okay, two parts to that really. First of all, the offer of a ceasefire. I personally haven't seen that on the wires, but I've been travelling since 4 o'clock this morning to get here to be in person to give you this brief. As far as the ceasefire is concerned, that is a political decision for our higher command to tell us when to stop. My commander's intent is, and his remit is quite clear, to use all force to protect the civilian population of Libya. And until we are directed otherwise by the higher command of NATO, the commander will carry on with his mission. The second part is the turning point. About 2 weeks ago, I think it became apparent that our sortie rate was able to be increased, and we were able to take on the target sets that we had proved. It takes a while to develop all the information, all the intelligence and reconnaissance and surveillance that's required to make sure that the precision weapons that are employed are used to their best effect, resulting in the least amount of risk to casualties on the ground. Once all of that had been achieved, NATO was able to employ the large amount of assets from within the current team that NATO is working with to carry out the build-up of strikes and to get us to the position we are now. And that position is a time when the maritime forces are significantly impacted upon, so their ability to attack civilian population, hinder humanitarian aid, or restrict or put NATO ships at risk is significantly reduced. Thank you.
Yeah, on the ceasefire, I would like to add that until now, all the offers for a ceasefire that we have seen from the Gaddafi regime were not serious, and at the same time, as those offers were made, the pro-Gaddafi regimes were attacking civilians. As you know, our operations will continue until 3 conditions are met. All the attacks against civilians have ended. All the forces, pro-Gaddafi forces, have been withdrawn to their bases, and there is full and unhindered humanitarian access to people in need. The Guardian.
Ian Trainer of The Guardian. 2 points for either of you. Wing Commander, you refer to the apparent shift in tactics by the regime as threatening both NATO maritime assets and coalition ships off the coast there. Can you specify what you mean by non-NATO maritime assets in the area, please? And for Carmen, you were talking about the NAC meeting this week.
Yes.
Can you say whether the rules of engagement were discussed at that meeting and whether there's any suggestion that they might be extended or changed? Thank you.
Taking the first point, Ian, and thank you for that. There was a significant change in tactics. Up until about 2, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, we had, in fact, I think it was the 29th of April, we hadn't seen maritime assets being employed in the situation in Libya. That changed when maritime assets were used to lay mines in the entrance to Misrata. So there was a significant change of tactics. Following that, we saw a rib being left still in the water, set up as a significant threat. There was a ton of explosives on that rib, and the EOD teams decided that that rib was a significant risk to shipping, whether it be civilian or military. And for that reason, that rib was hit at sea and exploded at sea. You asked why I'd said NATO and coalition. As you're aware, there are certain nations that are a part of NATO, and there are others that sit on the outside but work alongside. And the nations that have contributed, and the reason I say the NATO and coalition, is there are some nations that are not fully engrossed within the NATO construct. Carmen, would you like to take the second question?
Yes, from my side, I can tell you that there hasn't been any discussion at all in the North Atlantic Council of a possible change of the rules of engagement that, as you know, are approved at 28.
Nicolas Gros-Vérel, le quotidien français Ouest France, on le weblog Bruxelles 2. On Tunisia, Commander, could I ask if you could do something on because there are some incidents on the border between Tunisia and Libya, and I think the only way for the pro-Gaddafi forces to attack Nalut is to go through the Tunisian territory. Could you have some forces to have an observer or to interposition force in this sector?
Okay, thank you. For me, that question really leads to one answer. We do not have military personnel from NATO on the ground, so we could not do what you're asking. What we can do is we can maintain a form of overwatch to see what is happening on the ground and take all information available, wherever it comes from on the ground, open source or anything, to maintain the details that we can build up using the skills of the intelligence officers and the personnel within our construct of the headquarters and our outside agencies to build up a picture. And we can use our air assets to then assist. Whenever we see forces employing weapons against civilians, they become a legitimate target within our mandate. So we can interdict then. But until then, it's quite clear. We do not have forces on the ground, and we cannot, therefore, get involved on the ground in the Wazan area. This is last one.
Do you have any demand of assistance of Tunisian government?
That's a political question, and I leave that one for Carmen.
Of course, Tunisia is, as you know, a partner country, so we are in contact with Tunisia, but not on this issue, as far as I understand. We have time for two last questions, so please.
Mark Carlson from the Associated Press Television. Why has NATO not been able to strike and kill Gaddafi himself?
I find myself slightly surprised you asked the question because, I mean, it's been answered by every single press conference since we started this. The location of Gaddafi as an individual is not relevant for the operational effect. The operational effect is to stop the attacks on civilian personnel. So if we can stop the command and control chain, then that will stop it, because the forces on the ground will not be directed. We at no time identify individuals as targets. Thank you.
Last question now, I'm sorry.
Khalid
But Mike.
Faruqi from Geo Television, Pakistan. But you did try to bombard compound in Tripoli, which are associated with Gaddafi regime. So NATO is trying, this is the impression in Islamic world, that NATO is trying to kill Gaddafi himself.
NATO and the partners in this operation have not identified Gaddafi as an individual to be targeted. In Tripoli, we have clearly attacked command and control nodes. And in doing that, we stop the ability of the communications from command and control to the forces on the ground. And thereby, we stop the shootings and the bombings of the civilian people. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.